Princess Vellani of the Kirith Dominion stood in the hiring hall of station, Meridian with her arms crossed and her 4 eyes narrowed in frustration. And she could not believe what her advisors had brought before her as a potential bodyguard for the most important diplomatic mission of her young life. The creature standing in front of her was a human, and humans were known across the galaxy as one of the weakest species to ever achieve interstellar travel. And Vellani had heard all the stories about them. They had no natural armor, no psychic abilities, no venom, no regeneration. And their bodies were so fragile that even a minor fall could break their bones. "Is this a joke?" Vellani asked her chief advisor, a tall Kirith male named Torvan, who had served her family for 300 years. Torvan lowered his head in shame and said, "I am sorry, Your Highness, but all of our elite warriors have been sent to the border conflicts. And this human was the only qualified candidate available on such short notice." The human stood there without moving, and Vellani studied him with all 4 of her eyes, trying to understand what she was looking at. And she saw a creature of medium height with brown skin and short black hair and brown eyes that watched her with a calmness she did not expect. His name was Marcus Cole, and according to his records, he had served in something called the United Earth Military for 15 years. And he had been working as a private security contractor for the last 5 years. But none of that impressed Vellani because she knew what humans were. They were soft, they were short-lived, and they came from a species that had only discovered faster-than-light travel about 100 years ago. "Can you guard me, human?" Vellani asked, putting as much disdain into the word as she could manage. Marcus Cole did not flinch, and he did not look away, and he simply said, "Yes, Your Highness." Vellani let out a sound of frustration and turned to Torvan and said, "He will die in the first hour if there is any real danger, and then I will be left without any protection at all." "If I may speak, Your Highness," Marcus said, and his voice was calm and steady like a still pond. Vellani waved her hand in permission, curious despite herself about what excuse this weak creature could possibly offer. "I understand that humans have a certain reputation in the galaxy," Marcus said, "and I know that most species see us as fragile and primitive. But I have protected 17 clients across 12 different star systems over the past 5 years, and every single one of them is still alive, and I have never failed a contract." "That proves nothing," Vellani said with a dismissive gesture. "You probably guarded merchants on safe trade routes where the biggest danger was a bad meal. My last client was Ambassador Krethvus of the Taloran Confederacy," Marcus said, without any change in his expression. "And during his visit to the Vrexy border worlds, we were ambushed by 47 insurgents armed with plasma weapons and powered armor. And I got him out alive while eliminating 31 of the attackers. Myself." Torvan made a sound of surprise and checked his data tablet and said, "Your Highness, I am seeing confirmation of this in the Galactic Security Database. Sergeant Cole does have an impressive record." Vellani was not convinced. But she was also running out of time, and the Peace Summit at Axios 7 would begin in 3 days. And she could not arrive without any security at all. "Fine," she said with clear unhappiness in her voice. "You will guard me during the summit, human, but if you fail me even once, I will have you thrown out of an airlock. Do you understand?" "Understood, Your Highness," Marcus said. And for just a moment, Vellani thought she saw something flash in his brown eyes, something that made her feel strange. But then it was gone, and she dismissed it as her imagination. What Vellani did not know, what she could not possibly know, was the true nature of the creature she had just hired. She did not know that Earth was what galactic scientists called a death world, a planet so hostile and dangerous that most species could not survive on its surface for more than a few hours. She did not know that humans had evolved alongside predators with teeth longer than her forearm, and venomous creatures that could kill with a single bite. and diseases that could wipe out entire populations. And they had survived all of it through pure stubborn refusal to die. She did not know that the human body, which looked so soft and weak, could repair itself from injuries that would kill most other species, and could keep functioning through pain and exhaustion that would shut down any other creature. She did not know about persistence hunting, the ancient human technique of chasing prey across vast distances until the prey simply collapsed from exhaustion, because humans could keep moving long after other creatures had given up. She did not know that humans had a chemical in their bodies called adrenaline that could temporarily give them incredible strength and speed and pain resistance when they were in danger. And most importantly, she did not know what humans became when they were given something to protect, how they would fight and bleed and suffer and keep going far past any reasonable limit. Because giving up was simply not something humans did when someone depended on them. The journey to Axio 7 took 2 days, and during that time Vellani ignored Marcus as much as possible, treating him like a piece of furniture that happened to follow her around. But Marcus did not seem bothered by this at all. He spent his time studying the station layouts and security protocols and diplomatic schedules. And he asked Torvan hundreds of questions about the other species who would be attending the summit. And he made lists and plans and backup plans that filled 3 data tablets. Why does he need all of that information? Vellani asked Torvan on the 2nd day. Watching Marcus study the ventilation system of Axio 7 with intense focus. I do not know, Your Highness, Torvan admitted, but I have never seen a bodyguard prepare this thoroughly before. When they arrived at Axio 7, Vellani was greeted by representatives from a dozen different species, and she put on her diplomatic smile and began the work she had come here to do. And Marcus stood at the edge of the room like a shadow, watching everything and everyone with those calm brown eyes. The other delegates noticed him, of course, and several of them made comments about the princess who had brought a human for protection. And Vellani felt her face flush with embarrassment every time she heard the whispered jokes. Ambassador Vrextal of the Hegemony was the worst offender. He was a massive, insectoid creature with 4 arms and mandibles that could cut through metal. And he took great pleasure in mocking the pet human that the Kirith princess had brought with her. Tell me, little human, Vrextal said on the first evening, clicking his mandibles with amusement, what will you do if someone threatens your mistress bleed on them until they surrender? The other delegates laughed, and Vellani wished she could sink through the floor. But Marcus simply looked at the ambassador with that same calm expression and said, Ambassador, with respect, I hope you never have to find out what I can do. There was something in his voice that made the laughter stop. Something cold and hard and absolutely certain. And for just a moment, Vrextal stopped clicking his mandibles and looked at the human with all 6 of his eyes. But then the moment passed and everyone went back to their conversations, and Vellani decided she had imagined the whole thing, because what could a simple human possibly do against creatures like these? She would find out soon enough, and the answer would change everything she thought she knew about the galaxy and the strange soft creatures called humans. The first 3 days on Axio 7 passed without incident, and Vellani began to think that maybe she had worried for nothing, and maybe this peace summit would go smoothly after all. But she noticed that her human bodyguard did not share her optimism. Marcus Cole never relaxed, not even for a moment, and he stood at the edge of every meeting room with his eyes moving constantly, watching every delegate and every servant and every shadow in the corners. And Vellani found it both annoying and strangely comforting. Do you ever sit down? She asked him on the 3rd night, after a long day of negotiations. Not while I am on duty. Your Highness, Marcus replied. You have been on duty for 12 hours, Vellani said with frustration in her voice. And you did the same thing yesterday and the day before? Do humans not need rest? Marcus allowed himself a small smile and said, We need rest eventually, Your Highness. But 12 hours is nothing. I once stood guard for 36 hours straight during a siege on Kepler Station. And I have done longer during my military service. Vellani stared at him with all four of her eyes and tried to understand how such a fragile creature could endure such things. And she decided he must be exaggerating to impress her. But as the days passed, she began to notice other strange things about her human bodyguard that did not fit with what she thought she knew about his species. On the fourth morning, Marcus stopped a Kirith servant in the hallway outside her quarters, a young female carrying a tray of morning refreshments. And he took the tray from her hands and set it on the floor and said, "Your Highness, please step back into your room. What are you doing?" Vellani demanded, offended that he would treat her servant so rudely. "There is something wrong with this food," Marcus said. And he leaned close to the tray and inhaled deeply through his nose. "I can smell it. There is a chemical compound mixed into the sweet cakes that should not be there." "That is ridiculous," Vellani said. "Humans cannot possibly have senses that good." But Torvan had already called for a security scan. And when the results came back, everyone went very quiet. Because the sweet cakes contained a poison called Vareth 7 that was specifically designed to kill Kirith royalty. The servant tried to run, but Marcus was faster, and he caught her before she had taken 3 steps and pinned her to the ground with a technique that looked simple but was absolutely impossible to escape. "Who sent you?" Marcus asked, and his voice was calm, but there was something underneath it now. Something that made Vellani's scales prickle with unease. The servant refused to talk at first, but station security took her away for questioning. And within an hour, they had confirmed that she was an assassin from a rival Kirith house that opposed the peace summit. Vellani sat in her quarters afterward and looked at Marcus with new eyes and said, "How did you know?" "Humans evolved on a planet filled with things that wanted to kill us," Marcus explained. "And many of those things used poison. So, over millions of years we developed the ability to detect certain chemical compounds by smell. It is not perfect. But Vareth 7 has a very distinctive scent once you know what to look for." "You knew what Kirith poison smells like?" "I studied every known toxin that could affect your species before we left for the summit," Marcus said. "And I memorized their chemical signatures and delivery methods and symptoms and treatments." Vellani did not know what to say to this, because she had never met a bodyguard who prepared so thoroughly. And she was beginning to realize that she had badly underestimated the human. That night she asked Torvan to show her Marcus's preparation files, and what she found shocked her completely. He had acquired detailed schematics of every section of Axio 7, including areas that were supposed to be classified. And he had memorized the patrol routes of every security team on the station. And he had identified 17 different escape routes from her quarters to the emergency evacuation base. He had also compiled files on every delegate attending the summit, including their species' strengths and weaknesses, their political positions, their known enemies, and any history of violence or criminal activity. "This is incredible," Vellani said to Torvan. "How did he gather all of this information?" "I asked him the same question, Your Highness," Torvan replied. "And he said that humans do not have natural weapons or armor or special abilities. So they survive by thinking and planning and preparing for every possible situation. But this level of preparation seems almost obsessive." He said that humans have a saying, "Proper preparation prevents poor performance." And he takes this saying very seriously. Vellani thought about this for a long time, and she began to see Marcus Cole in a different light. Not as a weak creature who happened to carry weapons, but as something else entirely, a thinking predator who made up for physical limitations with relentless intelligence and preparation. On the 5th day, she caught Marcus doing something strange in a maintenance corridor near her quarters. And when she demanded an explanation, he showed her a small device he had hidden in the wall. It is a motion sensor linked to my personal communicator, he explained. And I have placed 12 of them throughout this section of the station. So I will know if anyone approaches your quarters from any direction, even through the maintenance tunnels. When did you do this? The first night, Your Highness, while you were sleeping. You did not sleep at all that night? I slept for 2 hours, Marcus said. And that was enough. Humans can function on minimal sleep for extended periods when necessary. Although we do eventually need to recover. Vellani shook her head in wonder and said, You are nothing like what I expected a human to be. Most species underestimate us, Marcus agreed. And honestly, that is one of our greatest advantages. Nobody expects the soft pink creatures to be dangerous. And by the time they realize their mistake, it is usually too late. That evening there was a formal dinner for all the delegates, and Vellani attended with Marcus standing behind her chair like a statue. And Ambassador Rextal once again began making jokes about the human bodyguard. I still do not understand why the Kirith princess brought such a pathetic creature for protection, Rextal said loudly enough for everyone to hear. Does she not know that humans are barely more evolved than the animals they used to hunt on their primitive world? Several delegates laughed, but Vellani noticed that some of them, particularly those who had actually worked with humans before, did not laugh at all and instead looked uncomfortable. Tell me, human, Rextal continued, turning his 6 eyes toward Marcus. What do your people even have to offer the galaxy? You have no special abilities, no advanced technology, no ancient wisdom. What makes you think you belong among species like us? Marcus was quiet for a moment, and then he said in his calm voice, Ambassador, may I ask you a question? Rextal clicked his mandibles in amusement and said, Speak, little creature. How many of your soldiers does it take to subdue a single human in close combat? The question hung in the air, and Rextal's mandibles stopped clicking, and he said, What kind of ridiculous question is that one of my warriors could crush a human with a single blow? That is not what your military training manuals say, Marcus replied. And his voice was still calm, but there was something sharp underneath it now. According to your own official documents, the recommended ratio for engaging a trained human combatant is 5-to-1, with a minimum of 3 soldiers for any engagement. Would you like me to explain why? The room had gone very quiet, and Rextal's 6 eyes were all fixed on Marcus with sudden intensity. Humans are persistent predators, Marcus continued, and we evolved to chase prey across vast distances until they collapsed from exhaustion. And that same endurance applies to combat. We do not stop fighting when we are injured. We do not stop fighting when we are tired. And we do not stop fighting when every logical calculation says we should surrender. Because giving up is simply not something our species does. He paused and looked directly at Rextal and said, Your people are stronger than us and faster than us and harder to kill than us. But when the battle goes long, when it becomes a test of endurance and will rather than raw power, humans win. We always win, because we simply refuse to lose. Nobody laughed after that, and Rextal said nothing more about the human for the rest of the evening. And Vellani began to understand that she had hired something far more dangerous than she had ever imagined. She did not know that in less than 24 hours, she would see exactly what Marcus Cole was capable of, and it would change her understanding of humans forever. The attack came on the 6th night, and it came without warning. And suddenly, everything that Vellani thought she knew about her human bodyguard was put to the ultimate test. She was preparing for sleep when the first explosion shook the station, and the lights flickered and alarms began screaming. And before she could even process what was happening, Marcus Cole burst through her door with 2 weapons in his hands. Your Highness, we need to move now, he said, and his voice was still calm, but his eyes were different. They were hard and focused and absolutely deadly. What is happening? Vellani demanded as Marcus grabbed her arm and pulled her toward the door. A coordinated attack, Marcus replied. Multiple factions working together. I counted at least 3 different species in the initial assault team, and they have taken control of the main security hub. Which means this is not a random attack, but a planned operation. They made it into the hallway, but Marcus stopped suddenly and pushed Vellani against the wall and put a finger to his lips. And she heard footsteps coming from around the corner, heavy footsteps that belonged to armored soldiers. Marcus pointed at the reinforced bathroom in her quarters and whispered, "Get inside, lock the door, and do not come out until I tell you. Do you understand? But there must be dozens of them. Do you trust me, Your Highness?" Vellani looked into his brown eyes and saw something there that she had never noticed before: a fire, a determination, an absolute certainty that was both terrifying and comforting at the same time. "Yes," she whispered, surprising herself with the answer. "Then go now." She ran to the bathroom and sealed the door behind her. And she heard Marcus moving furniture in the main room. And then she heard voices shouting and weapons charging. And then she heard something she would never forget for the rest of her very long life. The door to her quarters exploded inward, and soldiers poured through the opening. Vrexy warriors in powered armor, Kirith assassins with psychic blades, Tauren mercenaries whose bodies could regenerate from almost any wound. There were 30 of them, and there was one human. Marcus Cole did not wait for them to attack. He moved first, and he moved like nothing Vellani had ever seen. He was not graceful like a Kirith warrior, and he was not powerful like a Vrexy soldier, but he was something else entirely. He was brutal and efficient and absolutely relentless. The first Vrexy through the door took a blade to the gap in his armor where the helmet met the neck, and he was dead before he hit the floor. The second and third came together, but Marcus used the falling body of the first as a shield, and then he was between them, too close for their weapons to be effective, and his hands found the weak points in their armor with terrifying precision. A Kirith assassin tried to use her psychic abilities to predict his movements, but Marcus was not fighting with any pattern she could read. He was pure chaos. Pure aggression, changing direction and speed constantly, and her precognition was useless against something so unpredictable. Vellani watched through a small gap in the bathroom door, unable to look away, and she saw her human bodyguard do things that should have been impossible. A Tauren mercenary grabbed him from behind, wrapping massive arms around his chest to crush him. But Marcus slammed his head backward into the Tauren's face, and when the grip loosened, he spun and drove a blade into the creature's brainstem, the one place where even Tauren regeneration could not save him. More soldiers came through the door, and Marcus kept fighting. And Vellani saw him take hits that would have killed a Kirith instantly. A plasma bolt grazed his shoulder. A blade cut deep into his forearm. A Vrexy fist connected with his ribs with a crack she could hear from inside the bathroom. But he did not stop. He did not slow down. He did not show any sign that the pain even registered. Later, Vellani would learn about adrenaline, the human chemical that blocked pain and increased strength and pushed the body far beyond its normal limits, but in that moment she simply watched, in awe as this supposedly fragile creature destroyed enemies that should have torn him apart. The fight seemed to last forever, but it was probably only a few minutes, and when it was over, 18 soldiers lay dead or dying in Vellani's quarters. And Marcus Cole stood in the center of the carnage, breathing hard and covered in blood. "Your Highness," he called out, and his voice was strained but steady. "You can come out now. We need to move before reinforcements arrive." Vellani emerged from the bathroom on shaking legs, and she stared at the destruction around her with all 4 of her eyes wide in shock. You killed them all," she whispered. 18 of them, Marcus confirmed. "But there are more coming. We need to get to the communication hub so we can call for rescue." She noticed his injuries, then the burn on his shoulder. The deep cut on his forearm, where bone was visible through the flesh. The way he held himself, that suggested broken ribs, and she said, "You are badly hurt." "I can still fight," Marcus replied, "and I can still run. And that is all that matters right now. Can you keep up with me, Your Highness? Can you keep going with those wounds?" Marcus smiled, and it was a strange smile. Not cruel, but not kind either. Something ancient and predatory that sent shivers down Vellani's spine. "Your Highness, my ancestors used to chase animals across endless plains until the animals collapsed from exhaustion. And they did this while carrying injuries that would kill most species. And they did this for millions of years. Running while injured is literally what humans evolved to do." He handed her a small weapon from one of the fallen soldiers and said, "Stay behind me. Do exactly what I tell you, and we will get through this, I promise." They moved into the corridor, and Marcus led her through a maze of maintenance tunnels and service passages that he had memorized days before. And every time they encountered enemies, he dealt with them quickly and efficiently. Vellani lost count of how many attackers fell to her human bodyguard as they made their way through the station, and she began to understand something terrible and wonderful at the same time. Humans were not weak. They had simply been hiding their true nature behind soft skin and gentle smiles. And when someone threatened what they were sworn to protect, they became something else entirely. Something that would not stop. Something that could not be reasoned with. Something that would keep coming no matter how many times you knocked it down. As they moved through the station, word began to spread among the attackers about the human who was cutting through their forces like a blade through water. And fear began to spread with those words. Because the attackers had expected to capture a fragile princess protected by a weak alien. They had not expected to face a persistence predator from a death world, a creature that had evolved to never, ever give up. And by the time they realized their mistake, it was far too late. 12 hours had passed since the attack began, and Marcus Cole was still moving, still fighting, still protecting the princes who had once dismissed him as a weak and worthless creature. The corridors of Agio 7 had become a hunting ground, but the attackers were no longer sure who was the hunter and who was the prey. Vellani followed Marcus through another maintenance tunnel, her legs aching and her lungs burning. And she marveled at the human who showed no signs of slowing down despite wounds that would have put any Kirith warrior in a medical bay for weeks. "How are you still moving?" she asked as they paused in a small storage room to catch their breath. Marcus was checking his weapons and counting his remaining ammunition. And he said, "Your Highness, I have been awake for about 30 hours now. I have 3 broken ribs and a fractured wrist. I have lost approximately 2 liters of blood, and I am running on combat stimulants that I synthesized from the station's medical supplies, but I can keep going for at least another 20 hours before my body completely gives out. That is impossible." "It really is not," Marcus replied with that strange smile. "Human Special Forces operators have completed missions lasting 72 hours without sleep. And some have pushed even further in extreme circumstances. Our bodies are remarkably resilient when we have something worth fighting for." He finished his check and looked at her with those calm brown eyes and said, "You are what I am fighting for, Your Highness, and I will not stop until you are safe. That is not a boast or a promise. It is simply a fact of human nature." They moved on, and the station seemed to grow darker and more dangerous with every passing hour. But Marcus navigated through it like he had lived there his entire life. At one point, they encountered a patrol of 6 Rexy soldiers, and Marcus took them down in less than a minute using a combination of blade work and improvised weapons. And Vellani watched him use a broken pipe as efficiently as any Kirith warrior used a psychic blade. "You are enjoying this," she said afterward. And she was not sure if it was a question or an accusation. "No," Marcus replied, wiping blood from his face. I do not enjoy killing, but I am very, very good at it. And there is a certain satisfaction in being good at something. Even something terrible. They had almost reached the communication hub when a voice echoed through the station's speaker system, and Vellani recognized it as Commander Rex Stow of the Hegemony, the same ambassador who had mocked Marcus at the dinner just 2 nights before. "Attention, human," Rextel said, and there was no amusement in his voice now, only cold fury. "We know you are heading for the communication hub, and we have 40 soldiers blocking every approach. You have fought well. I admit this, but you are wounded and exhausted and outnumbered. And continuing this resistance is simply illogical. Surrender the princess, and I will grant you a quick death." Marcus found a communication panel and keyed into the same channel, and Vellani heard him speak in a voice that was hoarse from exhaustion, but absolutely steady. "Commander Vrextel, I want to tell you something about humans, because I think you have misunderstood what you are dealing with." "Speak then. Little creature, what wisdom can a dying human offer?" "My people crossed our entire planet on foot," Marcus said. "And we hunted animals 10 times our size by following them until they collapsed from exhaustion. We survived ice ages that killed most other species, and plagues that wiped out half our population, and wars that burned entire continents. And through all of that, through millions of years of death and suffering and struggle, we never stopped. We never gave up. We never surrendered." He paused, and Vellani saw something in his eyes that made her scales prickle with a primal fear she did not understand. "I have been awake for 30 hours, Marcus continued, "and I have 3 broken ribs. And I have lost enough blood that I should probably be unconscious right now. But I am still standing, Commander, and I am still fighting. And I will keep fighting until every single one of your soldiers is dead, or until my heart stops beating." His voice dropped to something cold and quiet and absolutely terrifying. "The princess is under my protection, and you cannot have her, not today. Not ever so. Send your 40 soldiers, Commander. Send 100. Send 1,000 if you have them. I will kill every last one of them. Or I will die trying, but I will never stop." There was silence on the channel for a long moment. And then Vrextel said, "You are insane." "No," Marcus replied. "I am human, and now you understand what that means." He cut the channel and turned to Vellani and said, "They will send a kill team, their best soldiers, and I need you to stay hidden while I deal with them. You cannot possibly fight their best soldiers in your condition. Watch me." The kill team came 20 minutes later, 8 elite Rexy warriors in the most advanced powered armor the Hegemony could produce, each one capable of tearing a ground vehicle apart with their bare hands. Marcus met them in a corridor near the communication hub, and what followed was not a battle but a masterclass in human combat. He used the narrow corridor against them, making their numbers useless, and he targeted their armor's weak points with surgical precision joints, sensor arrays, power couplings, disabling them piece by piece. One Vrexy managed to grab him and slam him into a wall hard enough to crack the metal, and Vellani screamed because she was sure he was dead. But Marcus just kept fighting, kept moving, kept killing. When it was over, 8 elite soldiers lay broken on the floor, and Marcus Cole stood among them with blood running down his face and a smile on his lips. "Your Highness," he called out, "the way to the communication hub is clear. We need to move now before they send more." They ran, and Vellani could hear Marcus's breathing becoming labored and see the way his steps were growing unsteady. But he would not slow down, would not stop, would not let his failing body prevent him from completing his mission. They reached the communication hub, and Marcus sealed the doors and began working on the systems to send a distress call. And Vellani stood beside him and watched and finally understood what humans really were. They were not the strongest species in the galaxy. They were not the fastest or the toughest or the most advanced. But they were something far more dangerous. They were a species that simply refused to die. that kept fighting long past the point where any rational creature would surrender, that would burn themselves to ash before abandoning someone under their protection. "The signal is sent," Marcus said. "Rescue forces should arrive within 8 hours. We just need to hold this position until then. Can you hold out for 8 more hours?" Marcus looked at her with those brown eyes that had seen so much death and said, "Your Highness, I will hold out for as long as it takes. That is not a question. It is a certainty." And in that moment, Vellani knew that he was telling the absolute truth. And she knew that she would never underestimate humans again. The next 8 hours were the longest of Vellani's life, and she spent them watching Marcus Cole slowly fall apart while refusing to stop protecting her. The attackers made 3 more attempts to breach the communication hub, and each time Marcus met them at the door with whatever weapons he had left. And each time he drove them back with a ferocity that seemed to defy the laws of biology. But Vellani could see the cost, could see the way his movements were becoming slower and less precise, could see the blood that kept seeping from wounds that should have been treated hours ago. "You need to rest," she told him after the 3rd assault. "You need medical attention. You are dying." "I am not dying yet," Marcus replied, slumping against the wall with his eyes still fixed on the door. "Humans can take a lot of punishment before we actually die. We just need to keep going a little longer. How can you be so calm about this?" Marcus was quiet for a moment. And then he said, "Your Highness, when I was young, my grandmother told me a story about my great-great-grandfather, who fought in a war on Earth a very long time ago. He was shot 3 times and had his arm broken. And he still carried his wounded friend 15 miles through enemy territory to reach safety. And when they asked him how he did it, he said he just did not think about stopping. He looked at her with those tired brown eyes and smiled and said, 'Humans do not think about stopping. We just keep putting one foot in front of the other until we reach the end. Whatever that end might be, and right now, the end is getting you home safely. So I will keep going until that happens.'" Vellani did not know what to say. So she sat down beside him, and they waited together for the rescue that might or might not come in time. The attackers made one final push about an hour before the relief forces arrived. And this time, they sent everyone they had left, over 20 soldiers of various species, all determined to kill the human who had humiliated them. Marcus could barely stand, but he stood anyway, and he picked up the last of his weapons, and he looked at Vellani with something like peace in his eyes. "Stay behind me, Your Highness," he said. "No matter what happens, stay behind me." The door exploded inward and the soldiers poured through, and Marcus Cole met them one last time. What followed was not graceful or elegant or tactical. It was raw and brutal and desperate. A wounded predator making its final stand against a pack of enemies. Marcus fought with knives and fists and teeth, with broken furniture and stolen weapons, with every ounce of strength his failing body could produce. Vellani saw him take a blade through the shoulder and keep fighting. She saw him get knocked to the ground and get back up again. She saw him use his own blood-slicked hands to choke the life out of a Taloran, who thought the human was finally finished. And through it all, he never let a single enemy get past him, never let any of them reach the princes he had sworn to protect. When the relief forces finally breached the station, they found Vellani in the communication hub, unharmed and untouched, surrounded by the bodies of 11 attackers who had made the final assault. And they found Marcus Cole still on his feet, barely conscious, held upright by nothing but willpower and a stubborn human refusal to fall. "Your Highness," he said when he heard the rescue team's voices, "I believe my contract is complete." And then he collapsed and Vellani screamed for the medics. And everything became chaos and shouting and rushing footsteps. Marcus Cole spent the next 3 days in a medical coma while the Kirith doctors worked to repair his broken body. And Vellani stayed by his side the entire time, despite the protests of her advisors. "He is just a human," Torvan said. "He was doing his job. You do not need to stay here." "He nearly died for me," Vellani replied. "He fought for 41 hours straight with wounds that would have killed any Kirith warrior in the first hour. I will stay until he wakes up." When Marcus finally opened his eyes, Vellani was there, and she had never been so relieved to see those calm brown eyes looking back at her. "Your Highness," he said, his voice rough and weak. "I hope I did not worry you." Vellani laughed, actually laughed, and said, "You did not worry me. You terrified me. I have never seen anyone fight like that in my entire life. I was just doing my job." "No," Vellani said firmly. "You were doing something far more than that. And I need to understand why. Why did you risk so much for someone who treated you so poorly, who dismissed you as weak and worthless?" Marcus was quiet for a long moment, and then he said, "Your Highness, you asked me if I could guard you. And I said yes. For humans, that is not just an agreement. It is a sacred bond when we say we will protect someone. We mean it with everything we are. But you could have escaped," Vellani pressed. "You could have found an escape pod and saved yourself. Why did you stay?" "Because you were my responsibility," Marcus replied simply. "And humans do not abandon people under our protection, ever, not for any reason. It is just not something we do." He met her eyes and said, "I know that other species see us as weak because we are soft and short-lived and easily damaged. But that is exactly why we fight so hard. We know how precious life is. We know how quickly it can end, and so, when we choose to protect something, we protect it with everything we have, even if it costs us everything." Vellani was quiet for a long time, thinking about everything she had seen and learned over the past week. And then she said, "I want to hire you permanently. Sergeant Cole, not just as a bodyguard, but as the commander of my personal security forces. That is a significant offer." "Your Highness, you earned it," Vellani said. "And I want you by my side. I have seen what you can do, and I have learned what humans really are. And I cannot imagine anyone else protecting me." Marcus smiled, that genuine smile she had rarely seen, and said, "Then I accept. Your Highness, I will stay as long as you need me." "Good," Vellani said. And she smiled back at him, "Because I have a feeling I am going to need you for a very long time." In the weeks and months that followed, word spread throughout the galaxy about what had happened on Axio 7 about the human who had single-handedly defeated over 70 attackers to protect an alien princess, and suddenly other species began to look at humans in a very different way. They were no longer the soft pink creatures that everyone dismissed and mocked. They were Deathworlders, persistence predators, relentless protectors who would never stop and never give up. And when Princess Vellani walked through the halls of the Galactic Senate with her human bodyguard at her side, nobody laughed, and nobody made jokes, and nobody even thought about threatening her. Because they knew what humans were now. They knew what humans could do. And they knew that the princess had asked the most dangerous question in the galaxy. "Can you guard me, human?" And the human had answered with blood and fire and 41 hours of unstoppable fury. She had not known what she was asking for when she hired Marcus Cole, but she had found out, and she would never forget it. And neither would anyone else who heard the story of the human who would not stop.